Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Nutshell discussion. If this is your first Nutshell, welcome. If you're returning, we're happy to have you back. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I might have a little sound issue on my end, but our presenter, Eva, is crystal clear, so I will try to go through the introduction pretty quickly so we can get on to the main event. My name is Katie Adams, and I am the Research and Demonstration Farm Manager here at the Savanna Institute, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. A nonprofit organization based out of Wisconsin and Illinois focused on agroforestry research and education. We truly believe that widespread agroforestry can help restore ecosystems, build resilience, and support strong economies of cooperation between farmers, researchers, and perennial industry builders. We do that through a variety of avenues, such as free online webinars, on-farm field days, and print and online resources focused on connecting researchers, farmers, enthusiasts, and educators to the work of agroforestry. And all of that is available for free on our website. You can learn more about the Savanna Institute at savannainstitute.org. At the end of this webinar, I'll also give a little more information about our upcoming event, the Perennial Farm Gathering, which we host each December. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Hefner Family Foundation and North Central SARE. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring you these really wonderful discussions for free. During this evening's nutshell, if you're joining us for a tutor, I want to invite you to share your questions and comments in the chat box on the platform. I will monitor them throughout the nutshell and make sure to address them as we go, and also ask the Q&A session during the end. If you're joining us by phone, you have instructions on how to ask a question after Eva's presentation, and you'll be able to ask directly. Okay, now on to the main event. We are so honored to welcome our presenter for the evening, Eva Ma, Farm Commons. Eva is Farmer and Partner Development Manager at Farm Commons, a nonprofit specializing in legal education for farmers. In addition to her work coaching farmers through farm law issues, Eva also operates a small market farm in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, growing produce, flowers, and herbs. And we're very thankful to have her online tonight to share her expertise. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Eva to get things started. So 1 second while I switch presenters. Welcome, Eva.
Hi, Katie, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for tonight's Nutshell webinar. I'm super happy to be here. Just quickly, for folks who want to open up another screen and follow along through some of the resources that I mentioned in this webinar on Farm Commons' website. This is our address, farmcommons.org, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. So without further ado, we'll dive into our webinar. But first, thank you so much, Katie and the Savanna Institute, for inviting us to be a part of your educational series this fall. We're really excited to be here. So this training will be all about cultivating legal resiliency when leasing land. And it's a webinar training that we've developed specifically for farmers. So farmers welcome, and if you're ag service providers working with farmers, we're excited to have you here too, and look forward to some good conversation and questions together. So I want to start this presentation off with Farm Commons' mission. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization that specializes in farm law education, so legal educational services for farmers. Our director is based in Minnesota, so folks in the Midwest may be quite familiar with us, but we are remotely officed, so I'm coming in here tonight from North Carolina. And we're really excited to work with a wide network of farmers and agricultural service providers to help farmers understand and solve their farm business law issues within an ecosystem of support. So that ecosystem of support is so core to our work. We couldn't do this work of empowering farmers through business law to create their own solutions to the farm business issues that they encounter in the course of managing their enterprises without the willingness to understand and learn what the issues even are and how to begin to address them. So I applaud all of you for being here tonight to learn more about how we can empower the culture to move forward, to grow forward, excuse me. So a little bit more about us. We create and deliver farm law educational materials that we have available on our website. We have an extensive library of over 150 farm law resources that span the subjects of employment law, business structures, leasing and purchasing land, food safety, sales and contracts, insurance and liability, as well as value-added ventures and agritourism. And all of those different resources, print, visual, and audio, are geared towards best risk management practices for farmers juggling the various liabilities that come along with each of those areas of managing their farm business. We also host in-person workshops and webinars that train farmers and agricultural service providers on each of those areas. Core to our work is training farmers to be leaders in their community regarding farm law. So really working with farmers to figure out the best solutions to their farm law issues in their business specific to their needs. So we do not advocate at all for template or model solutions. We know that each farm business is different, each community is different, and therefore the potential for the solutions is pretty much infinite. So we're really excited to connect with folks as we work through all these problems together to support the sustainable agricultural movement forward. All right, so Katie shared a bit about me. Thank you, Katie, for the great introduction. And I just shared a bit about Farm Commons as an organization. So I'd love to hear who's here with us tonight. So if you could please share your name and your affiliation in the chat box, or if you're calling in, Katie, I'm not sure if they have the capacity to speak out right now, but if we could just do some brief introductions, that would be great. Well, if folks haven't, go ahead, Kate.
What you do is turn on the Q&A session if you're doing this by phone. You can get in the queue by pressing *6 if you'd like to introduce yourself over the phone. So it's going to say Q&A, but what it really means is introduction. So I'm going to turn it on, and if you'd like to introduce yourself over the phone, then you just hit *6. So give me 1 second, I'll turn that on.
Great, thank you, Katie.
So if you're joining us by phone, hit *6 to introduce yourself. Well, Josiah is here with us, and they work for the Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Great, wonderful. Thanks for joining us tonight, Josiah.
And Rachel is in UW-Madison and is currently a graduate student in agroecology working on beginning training in land access.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Glad to have you, Rachel. So this is relevant to both of your work, so very excited to have you here.
And I'm Katie Adams, and in addition to my work at Land Institute, I actually run a farm business on leased land.
Great. Yes. So you have lots of lived experiences regarding leasing farmland. Well, wonderful. So we'd love to hear what's on your mind regarding your legal concerns when accessing farmland, since that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So if Josiah, Rachel, or Katie, if you'd like to speak to this question, we'd love to hear some of your concerns. It doesn't necessarily have to be concerns. Could just be issues, maybe whether a written lease is necessary over a spoken lease, or maybe some incidents you've come across in your working with farmers through extension.
Yes, I said that I plan on getting a place on my own this next summer. I had never bought or leased land before, so I'm unfamiliar with the process and what questions I need to ask.
Okay, great. We will cover some of the basic questions that you'll want to engage your potential landlord on for sure in this presentation. And congratulations, that's so exciting to be pursuing your own land in the coming year.
One of the things that I have a question on is, I don't know if you'll cover, but how to begin a conversation about leasing land, because that can sometimes be a scary thing, especially with someone that you might not know well.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a great discussion to have once we wrap up the main presentation, because I do not speak to that in the presentation, because that there's so much wisdom to be garnered from folks who have had hard conversations in different fields of life, and I can speak to some of my personal experience as well later on. So thank you all for sharing your concerns. Are there any others that have come in, Katie?
Nope.
Okay, great. So I'll move along. Well, I have good news for you all regarding your legal concerns. You are so much a part of the solution to those concerns. You can move forward by knowing some basic laws at the state and federal level, and by taking a few key action steps. But really the main work is about building strong relationships that reduce legal vulnerability, because so often folks come to Farm Commons, to our website, to our workshops, to our email boxes, wanting to get the silver bullet of the statute or the legal loophole that will solve their concerns and quandaries. But really the secret in farm law issues and navigating them is building strong relationships through good communication to prevent disputes from happening, and also to put in place a plan and fair expectations for what will happen when a dispute inevitably occurs. So we will be talking quite a bit about how to build strong relationships regarding leasing land. So with that, we'll dive right into our curriculum for tonight. So I want to start off with a story about a farmer who reached out to Farm Commons when we just got started as a nonprofit organization doing this work. Sam was leasing land, and one fall he planted $30,000 worth of seed garlic that he planned to harvest and sell in the coming year. In December of that year, so pretty much just a month after he had planted and established his garlic crop, he gets a call from his landowner who shared news with Sam that he was planning to sell the property in the following year, and that Sam would no longer have access to that land. So Sam, understandably, was in a panic. He had this huge investment in the land. He was confused as to whether, did he have a right to access this land because of the extent of his investment, or did he have nothing at this point because the landowner owned the property and he just shared with him, how it was going to go down. So Farmer Sam called Farm Commons, hoping that we would have the silver bullet or the legal loophole for him. But unfortunately for Sam, when we ended up talking to him, we asked, Sam, what did you and the landowner agree to as to how the lease would renew from year to year? Could the landowner just let you know, less than a month out from the year end that the lease would come to a close? What did y'all talk about? What did you agree to? And Sam's answer was, we didn't agree to anything regarding renewal. I didn't even know to ask about renewal. The subject just didn't come up. So although this is a dark story for Farmer Sam, it does have a silver lining in that we really have the potential to create the world that we want and the relationships that we want if we take the time to articulate it. And I mean articulating our plans, desires, expectations, and needs so that the parties involved understand how everyone else understands the relationship and the situation. So the legal moral of the story is that, generally speaking, state law on leasing land is a backstop for when tenants and landlords themselves don't come up with their own agreement. So if Sam and the landlord came to an agreement, that would be the first source of authority that the courts would uphold regarding how the lease would have been terminated. What did y'all agree to? What does it say in the leasing agreement, in the written leasing agreement? But because Sam and the landowner didn't come to any form of agreement on how the lease would renew, and nothing was written down to refer to, state law comes in as a default. And unfortunately for Sam and other small-scale farmers, especially those marketing direct-to-consumer, and practicing things like community-supported agriculture programs, on-farm suppers, agritourism ventures, these very innovative and new areas of farm law are way ahead of the written state and federal laws. So these backstop laws usually are not a good fit for these kinds of situations that sustainable farmers encounter. So the overall learning point from Sam's story is that farm businesses are the most resilient when the tenant and the landlord have a thorough discussion about the particulars of the arrangement, including renewal, including what area of land is being leased, who's responsible for maintenance, and other considerations that I'll get to here in a moment. So a few other legal tidbits. You should know that fundamentally unjust agreements may not be enforced by the court. Let's say that Sam and his landowner did talk about the details, and they came up with an agreement that was super unfair to one party. And just for the purpose of running Sam's story, let's say that this agreement was very unfair to Sam. Maybe this agreement said that the landlord could terminate at any point in time, and if the landlord chose to terminate, that Sam would have to pay a fee, a $500 fee, and that the landlord could just give Sam 2 weeks notice, and Sam would have to pay whatever the cost would be to remove his remaining items and property off the farm. A court may say, look, that's incredibly unfair to Sam. That's very unfair to one party, and we're not going to enforce it. However, if you pay attention to where that scenario is taking place, it's in court. So it would require the farmer going to court to have to defend and prove that this is an unfair situation. And if Sam or another farmer in this kind of scenario does choose to go to court, they may have some options if they talk with an attorney about the particulars. However, throughout that process, time and money are invested, and they may be lost if that time and money could have gone elsewhere in the farm business. So that's not necessarily where we want to be putting scarce resources if this kind of dispute could have been avoided in the first place. So the action step for farmers is to be thorough in coming to a robust, authentic agreement with landlords. And we also understand that some farmers are landlords themselves, so be thorough in coming to robust agreements with your tenants as well. So what does that mean? Well, it means engage in creative brainstorming. Think about how the relationship might pan out over the year, or over 3 years, or 5 years if it's a long-term lease. Anticipate scaling the business up. What improvements might you want to add to the land? What kind of use arrangement is there? Does the landowner plan to be there and have their own use of the property in tandem with the farmer's use? So discuss these different aspects, because the more information is known, the more fair expectations can come to be. So we really encourage having those hard conversations and getting to the nitty-gritty detail. So to speak to Katie's question earlier, like how do you begin to have these conversations, and to Josiah's interest about, once I'm in this conversation with a landlord, what do I need to be asking about? Well, At Farm Commons, though we do want to focus on managing risks, we also want to continue the culture of having good faith in our community and good faith in our relationships. So if someone has a property that's available and they hear that you're a farmer that's in need of land and they're excited to offer it for you, definitely, be open to how those conversations progress. Only when you get to a point to making significant movements towards establishing your relationship with the land and the landlord and the business, perhaps you are saving up money to invest in equipment and are in the process of transitioning out of a job because you're relying on this relationship to get your business started, that's when you want to start getting down to the brass tacks. But still, maintain that sense of community and good faith as you're having these conversations. But once you're in dialogue and you're in the process of drafting the lease, these are the basics that you want to cover. The lease should list out who the parties are, which parties are involved, and the capacity that they're involved in this relationship. So are they acting in their personal capacity as, me, Eva Moss, am I leasing the land in my personal capacity, or on behalf of my business, Heartstrong Farm, LLC? Is everyone who needs to be represented in this leasing relationship at the table? Do you have a business partner or partners? Are there other people that need to be involved in this conversation, maybe family members of the landlord who also own interests in the property? And exactly what land is being leased? Is there a precise legal description available at the County Register of Deeds? Is there a map of the premises available? You can usually find one on your county's zoning section of their website. When does a lease begin and when does it end? That is key if we return to Farmer Sam's story. And what is the rental payment? When is it due? How should it be paid? Is there a fee assessed if a payment comes in late? And if so, what is that fee and when will it be assessed and how? And who's responsible for paying property taxes on the premises? So these are really the basic elements that you'll want to have in your lease. And at the very basic level, you need to have the parties involved, a description of what land is being leased, when the lease begins and ends, and what the rental payment is. Those are the very basics that make a lease, legally speaking. But of course, the basics do not address the many different scenarios and relationships between the farmer, the land, and the landowner. So we also want to be thinking about what rights does the lease grant to the farmer? So we want to ask the question, is the farmer allowed to engage in any commercial use of the property? Are you interested in erecting a farm stand or doing sales direct from the farm? Well, you want to be sure that you can engage in that kind of activity. Is the lease limited only to agricultural use of the property? And if so, what are we considering agriculture to be defined as? Does this include agritourism events like on-farm suppers or pickling workshops, yoga on the farm? These are all popular business enterprises that are being added on to farm operations. And can the farmer do any processing on the premises? If a landlord is leasing out a parcel of land to a farmer and they understand the leasing relationship to be one of produce production, what about if the farmer becomes interested in on-farm processing of their chickens? Is this also a residential lease? Will a farmer be leasing a dwelling on the property? And would the parties prefer to handle the residential lease separate from the commercial farmland lease? And can the farmer sublease all or any portion of the premises? For example, on my farm property that I'm leasing, there are 8 auxiliary buildings and 2 of them are cabins. However, I'm not allowed to sublet or sublease any of those buildings to others for income. And is the landlord granting an exclusive right of use, or will the landlord also be using the leased premises? Maybe they have an office on the property, or they also maintain a garden on the property. And if so, what potential conflicts might arise based on that layering of different people using the land, and how should we manage them? Should we implement a schedule, identifying the types of use? Is equipment being shared? Are workshops being shared? And if conflicts do occur, such as damage to property, maybe something gets burned or stolen, or windows break, or lost revenue because of other parties' action, if something really goes wrong on the farm and there's significant damages to one of the buildings and the value of that goes down, should the party who loses be compensated? And if so, how? So these are all important questions to work through when you're drafting up a lease with a landlord. Or if you're the landlord, these are important things to be talking with your farmer about. Of course, this is not the end of the line. There are other really important considerations to discuss that include facilities, renewal terms, how communication and will be handled. Will it be mostly written? Are emails okay, in person? And how will a transfer of a lease be taken care of if a lease is ended prematurely? What if the landlord does decide to sell and you do talk about it and you want to explore the right of first refusal or option to purchase language to include in your lease? You also want to be thinking about insurance and conflict resolution proceedings. For example, in my farmland lease, we have a paragraph about conflict resolution, and we agree that we'll first talk about it, and if we can't resolve it by talking about it, then we'll work with a mediator to work through the issue, and if a mediator doesn't quite out, then we'll move to arbitration. And you also want it to be thinking about long-term improvements, especially for folks who plan to be on a parcel of land for a long-term lease. Are you building on that property? How permanent are those buildings? Are you cover cropping significant acreage on the land? You know, how do we measure that improvement to the soil fertility and the management of erosion, the mitigation of erosion, improvement of soil fertility and the capacity to have a farm there? How can we plan and capture the value of those long-term improvements? And will we, and how? So these are all really important considerations to discuss, and we flesh out each of these areas in our resource at Farm Commons, Drafting a Lease, Questions for Farmers and Landowners to Ask, which you can download for free in PDF form straight from our website. So now, after I've been telling y'all about all these questions, I have a question for you. Many farmers and landowners aren't talking about these considerations, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts on why aren't farmers and landowners having these kinds of conversations already? Feel free to send your thoughts in the chat box, or yeah, that's probably the best place to do it right now, so we don't have to mess with the call-in.
I know that my voice is probably going to be choppy, but one piece of feedback that I get from folks when the Savanna Institute talks about long-term leases and relationships between farmers and landowners is that you don't know where to start, and so the conversation just never happens.
Right.
And Josiah says, probably for the same reasons people don't discuss these things in marriage.
Yes, getting to the brass tacks, it's funny when we pose this question to folks in our in-person workshops. They're like, wow, a lease is kind of like a prenuptial agreement, but for leasing land. Yeah, absolutely. It can be overwhelming to think about where to start, and to speak to Josiah's point, the overwhelming reason that we've experienced and learned through our work at Farm Commons is that folks are scared that the relationship can't withstand scrutiny. If you hear about an exciting opportunity to lease land and you pursue it, especially as a beginning farmer, you might be scared to ask nitty-gritty questions, because what if you off-put the landowner and they change their mind? So it can be a very vulnerable and tricky area to navigate. But again, I think if we go into these conversations with good faith, that the reason we're having this conversation is for the respect and honor and love of the relationship and the opportunity to grow a resilient farm business and to do good on the land and the community. Like, I think that's a really beautiful perspective to inspire folks through these hard, nitty-gritty conversations. It's not a pointing a finger, it's rather a holding of hands to go forward. So yeah, thank y'all for your feedback. So we do want to emphasize that there are limits in setting up your land leasing relationship. Being thorough and thinking creatively through your leasing agreement is not the same thing as creating a lease that protects all rights and privileges of a party, you the farmer or you the landowner. And getting a lease that's 100% enforceable in court under the circumstances of your choosing, both of those goals can only be met with the help of an attorney. So you definitely want to work with an attorney if these are your goals. However, many people aren't interested in that. You know, they want to avoid conflict and to the most reasonable extent possible, and to feel good about if conflict does arise, you know, we have a way to deal with it. We can get clear because we set out a process beforehand. So in thinking about how to start these kinds of conversations and get these processes for communication and dispute resolution set up, we do have an activity that I'd love for us to interact with as best we can through a webinar format. And it's a short activity called Weeding Through a Farmland Lease. So the scenario is a farmer wants to cover crop 10 acres that she's leasing from a landlord to increase the fertility and reduce erosion. So not only does the farmer benefit from cover cropping, because the landowner also benefits when the land remains productive, because that's value on their land. So the question here is, how should the cover crop costs and responsibility be shared? What is fair here? So we could take a few moments to think about this question, and if you want to plug in your thoughts in the chat box and Katie can share them, that would be awesome. I'd love to hear them. Or Katie too, I know you've had some experience with this. I'd love to hear your story as well.
In one of the farms that I manage, the lease has the farmer and the landowner splitting the cost of the cover seed, and this is also a lease agreement where the leaser rents equipment from the farmer. So they use the equipment, the leaser rents the equipment from the landowner, and they use the landowner equipment, and the farmer puts in the cover seed. So it's a pretty 50-50 split in terms of labor and equipment.
Yeah, that's a great system that they've gotten set up.
And Josiah says he thinks 50-50.
Yeah, 50-50. Great, for responsibility and costs.
Leslie says they also think 50-50, but if the land is larger than 10 acres and the landowner will use the other part. Oh, I think it's a...
Oh, what was that, Katie? You cut out. You were saying that if it's larger than 10 acres?
And the landowner will use the other part. Oh, hold on. Okay. Oh, I think I know what they're trying to say. So they think 50-50, but the land is larger than 10 acres, and the landowner will use the other part, then the landowner should pay for more of that.
Okay, so proportionate. The responsibility should be shared proportionate to use of the land.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Leslie. I appreciate your input.
Yeah, thank you all. Have any more comments come through, Katie?
Nope, I think that's it for
that
one.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for your thoughtful answers to this question, and I encourage you all to continue to cultivate the ability to share your opinion on how things could be set up as you engage in conversations with landlords for farmland that you pursue for a leasing relationship, or with farmers that you work with through the course of their farm business journey. This guiding question of what is fair, not that what is fair in a leasing relationship is determined by any one party, because we need communication between those involved in the relationship to establish what is fair, and asking the question is how we start. So thank you all for participating in that activity. So moving forward, we've talked about having the hard conversations about the details and getting clear on what the leasing relationship could look like when drafting a lease. And I didn't say specifically that this would produce a written document, because oftentimes folks will talk about some of these aspects of a lease and they'll do it by handshake. And oral leases are defensible in just about every state, but under different terms. Some states will only acknowledge oral leases for a year. Long-term leases can't be oral; they have to be written and recorded with the Register of Deeds in the county where the land is located. But beyond that, written leases are a really powerful tool for conflict resolution and for proactively avoiding disputes, because when you do take the time to have those conversations about the basics and the different rights that the lease grants, if a party happens to forget over the course of the year, maybe the farmer is literally in the weeds in July and something happens and the well breaks, the well pump breaks, and they don't have access to water, and they reference the lease and it says, oh yeah, anything with maintenance with water and electric, the landlord will be taken care of. And it's clear, like there's a clear proceeding. The farmer in that instance would then go to the landlord, let them know that the well pump broke, and the landlord will fix that. And I'm sharing the story from experience. My well totally failed on me in July in North Carolina farming. And I felt so much security knowing that there was a clear pathway for how these kinds of issues would be dealt with. So that security really does come from coming to an agreement and writing it down to memorialize, to help with memory. So leasing relationships can and do go sideways for a variety of reasons. So we do emphasize that it is important to get it in writing for the greatest legal resiliency for the relationship and the farm business. So the action step here is to not make yourself vulnerable in a leasing relationship until it's in writing. We did work with a farmer in the Northeast who was planning to start a sheep farm, and she had started to make the transition out of her day job. She had formed an LLC for her farm business, and was gearing up to move out to the country to be on this parcel of land to have her sheep farm. And when she went to the landowner's house to sign papers, the landowner had changed her mind and said, never mind. So, don't make any big steps towards the relationship until it's in writing, until you can have some security of how things will proceed going forward. So you can be confident in your access as you make steps to start your farm business or transition it to a new piece of land. So be open to drafting a lease with landlords and tenants, again for farmers who are also landlords, to support the resiliency of your relationship and the farm business. So if your landlord isn't interested in a written lease, start with that good faith. Say, I'm so grateful that you're open and you trust me to be on this land, and this opportunity is wonderful, but I really think it would be a powerful tool to have this document for us to refer to as we continue to grow together in this relationship. So you can really focus on framing the document as a tool for the relationship. Because what a lot of people think of when they think of the law is they think of courtrooms, lawsuits, bad feelings, bad vibes. And really the law is what we agree to do for each other and how it's memorialized, which is in writing. So the law is simply what we agree to do for each other. So if you can frame your conversations regarding legalese, which can be scary and intimidating, you can encourage some softness and openness there to move forward. All right, so what about purchasing land and financing those purchases and land contracts and fence maintenance agreements? I know that's a big thing, especially out in the Midwest, and all the other issues that surround land access. Well, I have some really good news. The same core principles apply. The law wants to enforce the agreement of the parties first. Only when, a relationship, those involved don't come to an agreement, will the default state law step in. And again, those default state laws weren't written for direct-to-consumer, sustainable, community-focused farms. They were written for much larger scale commodity farms. So we really have so much power to create solutions that fit the needs of our farm businesses if we take the time to articulate our plans, expectations, wants, and desires. And so the charge is to proactively come to an agreement. I know it can be really hard to start a conversation about putting together a lease, but if you start the conversation as a way to grow the relationship into the future, hey, landlord Bob, I'm really excited about what we're doing here on this land and what we're talking about getting set up, and I really feel like having a lease would be a powerful tool to make sure that we have support as we're investing our time and money and energy in this. Would you be willing to talk through some details with me and just start with a little bit at a time? So yeah, just whatever steps you can take, I encourage you to do so. And the third step is to get it in writing, or know the risks of not putting in writing. Like I said before, many states will only honor oral or verbal lease on an annual basis. So we do have some very extensive resources. Some of these are 20-plus pages long that do speak to financing farmland purchases and also long-term leases, which we worked with actually the Savanna Institute to create, which is the resource, this one here, Inspirations for Creating a Long-Term Agricultural Lease. That model is specifically for an agroforestry farm. However, it can be adapted to suit other farm operations. And we also have resources on financing with promissory notes and land contracts, and a lease termination tip sheet to figure out what recourse you might have in that scenario. And then the questions that we went over at the beginning of the presentation are pulled from this last listed resource, Drafting a Lease, list of questions for farmers and landowners to ask. So again, all of these resources and more on land matters are available on our website, farmcommons.org, for free. All you have to do is create an account, and you can start downloading these PDFs to print off and read through as you need to. Well, folks, that's all I got for our presentation tonight. And thanks so much for being here and your feedback and engagement, and for listening to me as I share about how to cultivate legal resiliency when you lease land. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them as I'm able.
Thank you so much, Eva. I'm going to turn on the Q&A portion, and if you're joining us by computer, you can actually ask a question. That way I don't have to read it and my voice is all weird. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on now. If you're joining us by phone, all you'll have to do is press *6 to get in the queue to ask a question.
Great, thank you.
Dial *6 if you're by phone. Oh, we have someone, so I'm going to turn it over to them. Nope, it looks like I accidentally deleted that, so if you could dial *6 again, I apologize.
Hey, I was on mute as well. So I had posted that question earlier, about sharing the expense of cover crops and stuff. But one of the things I was thinking is, they're generally good for the soil, but that assumes that they come up and, you have the good weed control. So you get into a lot of variables, especially if you get like a partial stand. Then you ended up with more weeds than you did cover crop, and that, now the landowner's in a position where they have more weeds than they did before possibly. I guess that's just the type of thing you have to discuss, but what do y'all think?
Eva, are you still on the line?
Hey.
Oh, Eva,
yes.
You were muted. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I just unmuted you so that you can answer.
Oh, great. Question. Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good point to bring up, that cover cropping, depending on the management of the farmer or whoever, whether it's a landlord, whoever's putting in the cover crop, you may actually end up with some not great effects, like a greater weed seed bank or more weeds on the property. And I think you pretty much answer the question. Like, you'd have to bring that up and list that as a contingency. And I would think if I were talking to my landlord and was saying, I'm interested in cover cropping, some significant acreage, and there's a chance that it may not be so good weed-wise. The fertility might be great, but the weeds may be even more abundant. Are you still comfortable splitting the costs with me? So I think just being forthright and listing the contingencies is a way to still get clear on what is fair, having a greater understanding of what the end result might be, which might be more weeds, depending on how well someone cover crops or what the weather's like. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I think having that in the lease is a really great idea of checking in about these long-term soil fertility issues and coming up with contingency plans, which is another good reason to have a good relationship with your landlord. You're able to feel comfortable and safe coming with all of those contingencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leslie has the question, is it common to amend leases once they are signed or in between renewal periods?
Great question, Leslie. I can't speak to how common it is, but I can speak to the ability for the tenant and the landowner or landlord to write into the lease a stipulation that it can be amended either at any point in time, at a certain point in time, maybe like every third quarter, or at will. You just need to give the other party notice that it's going to be amended. So there's no hard limit on what can be included regarding amendments, renewals, and termination. Although some states do put a cap on how long a lease can be, they don't put requirements, generally speaking, on how the parties amend their agreement. That's usually left up to the parties themselves.
Similar to what Leslie was asking, I guess one of the things I'm not clear on is, I mean, if things change or if I have a new idea, is that something that needs to go into the lease, or is that something we discuss? You know, like, is the lease dynamic, or is it static and holds everything that I ever think I may want to do, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, also a great question. The lease can be as dynamic as the parties can envision, because right, you're agreeing to terms together. There's not an outline beyond the basics that I listed. The cost of the lease, the term of the lease, what actual piece of property is being leased. Beyond that, it's subject to terms that the tenant and the landlord want to include. So, for instance, you could have a line in your lease that you and the landlord agree on that says the farmer will grow produce, raise chickens for eggs, and also operate value-added good production and other enterprises on the farm, a pending discussion between the parties. So you can leave it open-ended like that. So yeah, you don't have to list every single thing that you can foresee yourself doing on the farm, but rather while discussing the lease agreement, see if you can leave operations on the farm, what's going to occur, open-ended to anticipate that the farm business will grow and diversify. So you may not be able to anticipate every enterprise you'll want to do on the farm property, but you can share in the conversation that you anticipate diversifying, and asking if we can be open to how you diversify and what you might add, and put that language in the lease.
Leslie asks, in your experience, is it better to start out with a longer-term 10-plus years lease if you don't know what you're doing as a beginning farmer, or do an annual lease?
In my personal experience as Farmer Eva, a 10-year lease scares me because I would want to think about how my farm plans might evolve over time. I wouldn't want to bank on necessarily getting all my systems set up for that length of time personally on leased land unless I had interest in potentially purchasing that property. In that scenario, I would start thinking about conversations with the landlord about including rent-to-own options, owner financing options, to capture the value that I would be adding over a long-term lease like 10 years. And again, from personal experience, the property that I'm on, I just couldn't imagine wanting to invest in soil improvements, built improvements over 10 years, unless I knew myself I would be interested in acquiring this property. And then I'd start having conversations regarding the lease and how my lease payments could potentially feed into that potential acquisition. So my current preference, and it has been over the past few years, has been with an annual lease that has written into it that it can be amended at any time, but that I have to give notice, either party has to give notice of termination within 3 months of the lease end, so by October of every year. We have to be pretty well set on what we'll be doing going forward so that the landowner can have enough time to figure out a new farmer tenant, and I can have enough time to move if I need to. I do have friends who have had good success with, if this makes sense, shorter term, longer leases. So 3- and 5-year leases where they've been able to get good footing on the land, literally and figuratively, figure out what they're doing as a farm business, experimenting with different types of enterprises and different types of growing methods, and then planning for some portability there at year 3 or year 5 to move on to another property. But with that said, my annual lease, I've renewed it for the past 3 years. So that has allowed for lots of conversation between me and the landlord and to build a relationship over time, because each year we discuss the terms in the lease and revisit it. And with longer term leases, what we've seen at Farm Commons is that folks won't return to the initial lease document to amend or review or see if the way the lease was drafted at year 1 still fits the leasing relationship in year 3 or 5 or even later. And that can bring up some issues when things aren't quite revisited and then an incident happens and you're still beholding each other to terms that you agreed to many years ago. So it just depends on your preference and how you foresee your relationship with the land.
As a follow-up, Leslie says that they're a landowner and they would be leasing out a portion of the land to another beginning farmer who will plant an apple orchard.
Oh, okay.
They say annual lease doesn't help that much, but perhaps your suggestion for a 3 to 5 year is a good length. I'd just like to jump in as someone who leases an apple orchard.
Yeah, you, Katie, you have lots of expertise there.
We lease already producing trees, so currently we have an annual lease, but we are looking to plant more trees on that property, and with the planting of the orchard, we would be asking, and we're sitting down to talk about this in the next couple of weeks, we would be asking for a 10-year lease. With the renewal for up to 20 years. Because we won't get production off the orchard, even with grafted trees, for at least 5 years, and that's where they'd be bearing precocious, when we won't have full production for 8 to 10 years. So it's the long-term lease structure. And the Farm Commons resource has lots of good information on those long-term leases and suggestions for ways people have navigated that, with making sure that an annual meeting is required by the lease to make sure that you're sitting down between the leaser, the landlord, and the person leasing once a year to revisit that. And if that doesn't happen, then there's penalties in the lease that have to be addressed.
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing that up, Katie, and tying it in with your experience leasing the orchard. So I definitely, what kind of production you're planning on will determine what kind of lease and the length, because I've just been doing produce and flowers and annual cropping. So if you're doing orchardry or perennial crops or anything that takes a longer term to harvest and recap that value, then you definitely want to be thinking about a longer lease. Any other questions before we wrap up?
One more question.
Yeah.
Does it complicate things if you want to put some of your land into CRP or other federal programs?
I wouldn't say that putting the land that you're leasing in a conservation program would create complications that would be like an issue in the leasing relationship. But it does require some planning and communication, because the farm, to enroll in those programs, has to have a farm number, and you might want to check on if your landowner has a farm number for the property, and if you have a farm number, and just making sure that you enroll yourself as a business so you can benefit from the planning from what is it, the NRCS, and those programs, cost sharing for installing buffers, riparian buffers, and those provisions in those conservation programs. So it's just getting clear on who's involved in those conservation programs by the farm number for the property, and letting your landowner know that you're going to enroll the property, or that you want to enroll the property in the program, and seeing if they're okay with it. And more than likely they will be, because they do receive some tax benefits from that usually.
As an example, I manage 2 farm properties that both have CRP. The first farm property, the CRP is enrolled by the landowner, and they receive the benefit of that. And the second property, the owner of the farm who's leasing the land enrolled in CRP, and they receive the benefit of that. And that's both clear in those both of those leases. So there's a couple different options. But if you're the farmer enrolling in CRP, it's important to make sure that your lease is at least as long as the CRP commitment.
Right, yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Katie. Yeah, you wouldn't want to miss out on those benefits just by virtue of the lease ending. Yep.
Okay, I think that wraps it up.
Well, great. Thank you all for the very thoughtful questions, and I'm excited for those of you who are moving on to land and starting your farm operations, those of you who are acquiring more land to expand current farm operations, and for those of you who are opening up your land to farmers so they can get their farm businesses growing. So thanks for learning with me tonight and taking the time, and thanks so much, Katie and Savanna Institute, for inviting me to host this webinar.
Thanks so much, Eva. I learned an incredible amount, and I'm excited to connect more with you and both Farm Commons. Just a shout out to the amazing work that they do and provide so much to farmers, landowners, and folks in the legal realm for free. It's absolutely stunning, the amount of information you can get from Farm Commons.
Oh, thanks, Katie.
So with that, I'd like to wrap it up. And one last thing. I'll be sending out an email with the slides that you saw tonight, as well as a link to the YouTube that you can enjoy over and over again and share with other folks you think would like this information. I also want to extend an invitation to each and every one of you to join us at the Perennial Farm Gathering hosted by the Savanna Institute this December. It's the first Friday and Saturday in December at the Sinsinawa Mound Center outside of Dubuque, Iowa. We'd love to see you there. It's a phenomenal weekend of connection and learning, and I have to say, absolute joy. So if you'd like more information, find us that on the website, or you can shoot me an email at katie@savannainstitute.org. So once again, thank you so much, Eva. I hope you have a wonderful end of your season, and we'll connect with everyone again soon.
Thanks, Katie. You too. Have a great night, y'all.